Stella sat in the quiet room, the weight of the story pressing on her chest. Her eyes, once bright with ambition, now seemed distant, as if she was reliving the moments that led to everything she had lost. She took a deep breath, her hands folding in front of her as she began. I never thought I'd be telling you this. Honestly, I didn't even think I'd ever speak about it out loud. But sometimes, when you've been through enough, you find yourself facing the truth, even if it hurts. Her voice was steady but laced with a quiet intensity. She shifted in her seat, her mind clearly wandering to a time long past. I built my business from scratch. No rich parents, no help from anyone, just me and a dream. People said I couldn't do it. They said a woman like me would never make it. But I showed them. I worked my fingers to the bone, putting every ounce of energy into making it succeed. It was everything to me. My pride, my legacy. She paused, her eyes flicking to a photograph on the wall, one of the early days of her business, when it was just a small shop with a handful of customers. The memory seemed bittersweet, like a distant dream she could never fully reclaim. But then he came into the picture, Stella continued, her voice tight with the weight of the words. My husband. When we met, everything felt perfect. He was supportive, charming, everything I thought I needed. We talked about growing the business together, expanding it, reaching new heights. It felt like a partnership, the dream we were both chasing. Her voice faltered for a second, but she quickly steadied herself, leaning forward slightly. At first, it wasn't obvious. It was subtle. He'd take care of the meetings, the calls with the clients, the finances. I thought it was just part of the deal. I trusted him. I thought he wanted to help. But the more he did, the more it felt like I was losing control of something that was supposed to be mine. Her hands clenched around the edges of the chair, as if she could still feel the tension of that moment, the betrayal that was slowly building without her knowing. One day, I walked into the office, and there he was, sitting in my chair. The chair I'd fought so hard for. I just stood there. I didn't even know what to say. He looked at me, smiled, like everything was normal, like he had the right to be there. And I just stood there, frozen. Stella's eyes hardened, her breath catching slightly as she leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. It was then that I realized he didn't just want to be a partner. He wanted to take it all, and I let him. She looked back down at the table, her voice quieter now, almost as if speaking to herself. I didn't fight back at first. I thought maybe I was overreacting, but the more I let it happen, the more I saw what he was really doing. He wasn't supporting me. He was taking everything. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. Her eyes met the camera, a spark of resolve in them. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not this time. Stella leaned forward, the tension in her shoulders visible. She had clearly lived through this moment too many times, but she was determined to make sure it was told right. Her eyes glinted with something deeper now, something fiercer, as if reliving the pain had fueled her resolve. Looking back, she said slowly, I realized I was too naive. I thought he loved me, that our marriage was built on trust and respect. I thought we were equals, but when it all came crashing down, I could see I had been blinded by my own feelings. The business wasn't just mine anymore, it was his, and I'd given him the keys without even realizing it. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, fingers digging into the wood as if she was trying to hold on to her past self. It wasn't just the office chair, either. It wasn't just him sitting there like he belonged in my space. It was everything. The decisions he made without consulting me, the way he began to dismiss my ideas like they didn't matter anymore, the way he would always throw in that little, "I think it's best if we do it this way," as if everything had to go through him now. Every single thing, my vision for the company, the hard work I'd put into it, all of it, started to slip from my grasp. Stella paused, her gaze hardening as she recalled the feeling of watching someone else claim the life she'd worked so hard to build. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the way he took control. It was how he made me feel small, like I wasn't good enough. He convinced me that maybe I wasn't cut out for this anymore, that I wasn't strong enough to lead the company anymore. And at first, I believed him. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't have it in me. Her voice trembled for a second before she steadied herself, breathing deeply as though pushing away the doubt that had once gripped her. But then, one day, I woke up. I was standing in front of the mirror, and I looked at myself, and I realized something. I had built this. It was mine. It was me. And no one could take that away from me unless I let them. That's when I decided to stop playing nice. Stella's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening as the memories took on an edge. I knew I had to do something drastic. I had to remind both of us, that I wasn't some fragile woman who could be brushed aside. I wasn't just a partner in name. I was the heart of this business. And if I was going to keep my dream alive, I would have to fight for it. Her hand reached for the glass of water in front of her, but she didn't take a sip. She just traced the rim absent-mindedly as her mind went back to that time. The feeling of quiet rage that had been building, slowly at first, then suddenly consuming her. I started gathering information. Quietly. I had to be careful. I couldn't let him know what I was doing. So, I watched. I listened. Every conversation he had with his new team of advisors, every call he made, every meeting he scheduled without me. It was like he thought I wouldn't notice, like I was too weak to care. But I kept track of everything. Stella leaned in now, her voice quieter but filled with intensity. I had to start small. If I went in guns blazing, he'd shut me down. I had to be smarter than that. I had to think 3 steps ahead. So I started calling in favors from people who owed me. You know, old colleagues, people who were loyal to me back when I was running the show. I began to make connections again, to remind people who I was. And as I did, I began to see the cracks in his armor. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Funny thing about men like him, when they think they're in control, they get careless. They start thinking they're untouchable, and that's when they slip. Stella's fingers drummed against the table now, a rhythm of quiet confidence. I knew there was one big mistake he made, one thing he thought I wouldn't catch. He started mismanaging the funds. Little by little, he'd moved money around, made some risky investments without me knowing. And I knew it was a matter of time before that came back to bite him. The moment I found out, I knew it was game over. He had no idea what was coming. Her eyes grew distant for a moment, as if remembering the rush of adrenaline when everything fell into place. I set up the meeting. I was going to confront him head on, make him see everything I'd been watching, every mistake he'd made, every piece of the puzzle he'd left behind. But I wasn't going to do it the way he thought I would. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to yell or cry or beg him to stop. This wasn't about that. This was about taking back what was mine. Her gaze snapped back to the present, and there was a fire in her eyes now, an undeniable strength that hadn't been there before. I walked into that meeting with everything I needed. I knew exactly how to take him down. and I knew exactly what it was going to cost me. But I also knew one thing. If I didn't do this, I'd lose everything. I'd lose myself. Stella's voice dropped to a whisper. And I wasn't ready to let that happen. She paused, the silence hanging thick in the air before she spoke again, her words lingering. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about me taking back my life. And with that, she fell quiet, waiting for what came next, knowing that everything was about to change. Stella sat back, her breath steady but deep. The silence was almost too much to bear now, the tension thick in the air as she continued her story. Her hands, which had been gripping the edge of the table moments ago, now rested loosely, but her fingers still trembled ever so slightly. When I walked into that meeting, she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge, I knew it wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. He had made it personal the moment he decided I didn't matter. The moment he thought he could steal everything I worked for without a second thought. She let out a slow breath, shaking her head as she began again. I remember the look on his face when I sat down across from him. He didn't even look up at first, like he already knew what was coming. But I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. Not this time. I didn't say anything at first. I just let him ramble on about the future of the company, about moving things forward, and how great everything was looking. It was like I wasn't even in the room. Stella's eyes darkened as she recalled that moment. The feeling of being invisible, of being disregarded as if she didn't have the right to speak anymore. But she wasn't that person anymore. Not after everything he had put her through. But when he finished talking, I didn't say anything for a few moments. I just stared at him. I wanted him to feel it. The weight of the silence. I wanted him to know I wasn't some naive woman anymore, someone he could walk all over. Her voice grew firmer, more resolute as she spoke. And then I hit him with it. The first thing I said to him was simple. You made a big mistake, John. He blinked. He wasn't expecting that. His face froze for a second, like he was trying to read me. But I didn't give him that satisfaction. I had the upper hand now. Stella leaned forward, as if the memory still burned with the same intensity. I pulled out the documents, the financial records he thought I'd never see, the transfers he thought I wouldn't notice. I laid them out on the table right in front of him. His eyes flickered as he scanned them, his mouth going dry as he tried to piece together what was happening. But it was too late. The proof was right there. She smiled to herself, her lips curling into a small but satisfied grin. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He realized what he had done. He realized that his manipulation wasn't as foolproof as he thought. The money he moved around, the shady decisions he made behind my back. I had it all. And I was ready to make him pay. Her voice lowered, her eyes steady and calculating. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't just going to take him down with finances. No, I had a bigger plan. I had one more card to play. I reached into my bag, pulled out another folder, this one was even thicker, and placed it gently in front of him. Stella's gaze locked onto the camera, the weight of her words making the room feel smaller. I'd hired a private investigator. I'd been tracking his every move, every conversation he'd had with his business partners. The ones I never knew about. The ones who were secretly lining their pockets with my money. I had everything. Everything he thought was safe. Everything he thought I was too dumb to figure out. And now I had the truth. Stella's eyes narrowed. her lips pressing together as she continued. I saw the color drain from his face as he realized what was in that folder. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about exposing him, exposing the lies he'd told, the deals he'd made behind my back, the way he tried to steal it all. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was going to destroy everything he had built. She shook her head, but there was no sign of remorse in her expression. People like him, they think they can get away with it. They think they can manipulate and control, that they can hide in the shadows while they take what's rightfully yours. But I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. I knew what I had to do. Stella's hands rested on the table now, calm, controlled. I looked him straight in the eye, and I said, "You've made one huge mistake, John, and I'm going to make sure you regret it." She paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air like a weight between them. And that was it. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. I had him. I had everything I needed to make him pay for what he'd done. But even as she spoke those words, there was no satisfaction in her eyes, no relief, just a quiet determination, the resolve of a woman who had fought for everything and lost too much along the way. "The war wasn't over yet," she continued, her voice low but sure. "It was only just beginning, and I wasn't going to stop until I got what was rightfully mine." Stella's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, but the fire in her eyes remained. Sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in, and sometimes you have to be willing to fight dirty to win. Her lips parted again, but this time she didn't speak right away. She let the silence stretch out, as if weighing the decision that had brought her here. Finally, she spoke again, her words almost a whisper. "And that's exactly what I was going to do." The room fell silent again. The game had changed. Stella's fingers lightly drummed against the edge of the table as she leaned back in her chair, her eyes focused somewhere far off. The determination in her expression had shifted into a quiet, almost calculating resolve. She had already made her decision. The battle was no longer about reclaiming her business. It was about making sure that John and anyone like him would never underestimate her again. "I wish I could tell you it was easy," she said, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of everything she had been through. But it wasn't. You see, the thing about revenge, about real, messy, life-shattering revenge, is that it's not clean. There's no neat little box that ties everything up with a bow at the end. No, it's ugly. It's dirty. It's the kind of thing that tests your every limit. And even though I knew I had to do it, I wasn't prepared for how far I would go. She took a deep breath, her gaze flickering to the papers in front of her as she paused, collecting her thoughts. After that meeting, I knew there was no turning back. He thought he could control everything. He thought I'd just roll over and let him take the business. But the thing about people like him is that they don't understand that you can only push someone so far before they push back. Harder. And when you do that, it changes everything. Stella's eyes turned steely, as though she was visualizing the next steps in her plan, the intricate moves she'd made to ensure her success. I went straight to work. I had my lawyer contact John's people, and I demanded a full audit of all company transactions. You know what he did? He panicked. He thought he could ignore me, brush me off. But I wasn't just some wife anymore. I wasn't just the soft partner he could push around. I had the resources, I had the knowledge, and I had the will. I'd built this from nothing, and I wasn't about to let him destroy it. Her hands clenched into fists for a moment, the nails biting into her palms. John didn't even know how deep I had dug. He didn't know that I was already talking to the employees he thought were loyal to him. People had started reaching out to me. People who had been too afraid to speak up before. People who were scared of losing their jobs. I had them all on my side, quietly gathering evidence, taking notes, digging through his dealings. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep the rot ran. Stella's lips twisted into a grim smile. But I still didn't go public. No, that wasn't the plan. I wasn't about to let John off the hook that easily. The key to winning was control, and I wasn't going to lose it. Her eyes darkened as she thought of the final pieces she had yet to put into motion. I waited until everything was lined up, until I had the full picture. I let him think he was in the clear, let him believe that he had outsmarted me, that I was no threat. And all the while, I was setting my trap. I had my lawyers working around the clock to prepare the lawsuits, to analyze every loophole, every possible way to take him down. But there was one thing I hadn't anticipated, one thing that caught me by surprise. Her voice softened, her gaze flickering with something that almost resembled regret, though it was quickly masked by the hard edges of her resolve. I underestimated how far he would go to protect himself. You see, in the end, it wasn't just the business he was trying to take. It was my life. He knew if I went public with everything, I would ruin him, and he knew I wouldn't stop until I did. Stella let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and cold. I thought he would be a coward. I thought he'd just buckle under the pressure. But that's when he pulled out the biggest card of all, the one I never saw coming. He tried to turn the tables. He went to the press, to the media, and he spun this whole narrative about me. He made it sound like I was the one who had taken advantage of him, that I was the one who didn't know what was going on in my own business. He painted me as the villain in my own story. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if the very thought still stung. It wasn't just a small attack. It was a full-blown smear campaign. The press bought into it. People who didn't know the first thing about me were suddenly believing his lies. He had the public on his side, painting himself as the victim, as the poor husband who had been betrayed by his own wife. Stella leaned forward again, her eyes narrowing in intensity. But that's when I knew I had him. That's when I knew this wasn't just about getting the company back. This was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, and making sure he could never, ever spin a story like that again. The way he'd manipulated everyone, the way he'd used me for his own gain, it all needed to be exposed. Her hands were now steady, but her grip tightened as she recalled the moment she'd decided to take her power back. I went to the media. I didn't just make a statement. I made sure the world knew what had really happened. I laid it all out. The financial manipulations, the lies, the betrayal. I even showed the footage of him meeting with his secret partners, plotting behind my back. I left no stone unturned. I took control of the narrative before he could. She leaned back in her chair, her voice softer now, but with the same quiet strength. The fallout was immediate. The press turned on him. The public saw him for what he really was, a liar and a fraud. And just like that, everything changed. He was the one on the defensive now, scrambling to cover up his tracks. Stella's lips parted, but her expression softened, as though acknowledging the personal cost of everything that had happened. I didn't just win the battle for my company. I won back my life. And in the end, I realized that the most powerful thing I could do wasn't just to take control of the business, it was to take control of myself. to show the world that I was more than just someone who could be pushed around. I was a force, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. She sat back, the weight of the past still heavy in her eyes, but there was no regret there now, only the calm of someone who had fought for everything and come out on top. Stella sat still, the flickering light from the desk lamp casting shadows over her face. The fire in her eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it burned brighter now. She was no longer just the woman who had been wronged. She was the woman who had fought back, who had reclaimed her life, and who had shown the world that betrayal was never an easy path to walk down. But winning the battle doesn't always mean winning the war, she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that came from experience. The aftermath, that's the hardest part. She sighed, pushing her hair back from her face as her gaze shifted to the window, lost in thought. When everything came crashing down for John, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had conquered anything. What I felt was empty, hollow. Because in the end, I realized that even though I had gotten back what was mine, I had lost a part of myself in the process. The anger, the resentment, all of it. It had eaten at me for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. I didn't know who I was without that fight. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the fierce determination that had driven her throughout her journey seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. I thought everything would be fine once I exposed him. I thought that once the truth came out, I would be free. But the truth is, there's no such thing as an easy victory when you've been betrayed. People will always remember how you fought dirty, how you didn't just take the high road, you tore down the road altogether. Stella's hands gently clasped together as she looked down at her lap. When the dust settled, I realized something. I'd won the business back. I'd won my name back. But at what cost? The people I once trusted, the people I had built everything with, so many of them turned on me. They sided with John. They believed his version of the story. And you know what hurt the most? They believed it because they wanted to. Because they couldn't accept that the perfect little image he had painted of himself was a lie. They wanted to believe I was the villain. They wanted to see me as the crazy, angry woman who couldn't take the pressure. Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. And that's when I realized the truth of it all. Sometimes the fight is bigger than you. It's not just about getting revenge or making things right. It's about coming to terms with who you become in the process. And that's where it gets tricky. Stella's eyes flicked to the pictures on the wall, the memories that once felt like triumphs now tainted by the faces of those who had turned against her. She had fought for so long to keep her business alive, to protect her legacy, but in the process, she had lost something far more valuable: trust. And once trust was gone, it was hard to rebuild anything. But you know what? She said, sitting up straighter now, as though shaking off the weight of the past. I wouldn't take any of it back. Not a single part. Because in the end, I learned something I could never have learned any other way. I learned what I was really capable of. I learned what it meant to stand up for myself, even when everyone told me I was crazy, even when I was told I was too emotional, too volatile, too everything. I learned that it's not about being perfect. It's about being real. Stella's gaze met the camera, steady and unwavering now. And that's the lesson. The one no one tells you. That's the thing people miss when they hear about my story. The truth is, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own power. It was about taking back control of my life, of my choices, of my future. And you know what? I'd do it again. Her smile was soft, but it carried an undeniable edge. Maybe that's the real victory. Not the business, not the revenge, not the satisfaction of seeing him squirm, but knowing that no matter what, I never gave up. I never stopped fighting for what I believed in, for who I am. That's the only thing I've truly won. She paused, as if reflecting on what she had said, and then leaned back, a hint of a satisfied grin pulling at her lips. People will call it whatever they want. Some will call it a success story. Some will call it a tragedy. But for me, it's just a story of survival, of how a woman, when pushed to her limit, will either break or become stronger. And I chose to be stronger. Her fingers brushed against the table as she took another breath, the tension easing slightly as she let the words sink in. The thing is, revenge doesn't fix everything. It doesn't heal the wounds. But it does give you the power to walk away from the people who tried to take everything from you. It gives you the strength to say, I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere. Stella stood up from the chair, looking at the room around her. And that's what I want you to understand. No matter what happens, no matter how many battles you lose along the way, as long as you're still standing, as long as you've got breath in your lungs, you're always in control. Always. Her eyes lingered on the room for a moment longer, the weight of her journey still with her, but now there was peace in her gaze. She had fought, she had won, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Stella paused, the silence hanging in the air like a heavy blanket. The journey she had shared felt as though it had come full circle, but she knew the last part was the most crucial. She leaned forward, her fingers lightly grazing the table as she prepared herself to speak once more. You know, she began slowly, it's strange. When you're going through something like this, something that shakes you to your core, you never really stop and think about the end. You're so focused on surviving, on getting through the fight, that you don't realize how much it changes you until the dust has settled, until you're standing there, looking at what you fought for, and you don't recognize yourself anymore. She took a deep breath, her eyes focused on the flickering light from the lamp. I thought getting the company back was the end of it. I thought that once I exposed John for who he really was, that would be enough. I'd get my business back, rebuild, and move on. But what I didn't expect was the weight of the aftermath. What I didn't expect was how different everything would feel once I got what I wanted. Her eyes softened as she reflected on the toll the fight had taken. When I got my business back, I realized something. Revenge doesn't make you feel whole. It doesn't fix the parts of you that were broken along the way. It doesn't heal the wounds you've carried with you for years. You think it will, you hope it will, but it's like trying to fill a hole with something that's just not big enough. Stella's gaze shifted to the window, as though she could see her past unraveling in the reflection. I thought once I defeated John, I'd be free. I thought that by exposing him, by taking everything back, I'd get closure. But here's the truth that no one tells you. Closure doesn't come from victory. It doesn't come from making the person who hurt you suffer. Closure comes from accepting what happened, from understanding that some things are never going to change, and that the real power lies in how you move forward. Her voice grew quieter, almost reflective. For so long, I had been so consumed by anger, by the need for justice, by the desire to make him pay for what he did to me. But in the end, I realized I had been holding on to that anger for too long. It wasn't just him that I had to let go of. It was the resentment. It was the rage. I had to learn to forgive, not for him, but for me, because I couldn't keep carrying that weight around anymore. Stella let out a long, slow breath, her eyes closing for a moment as though she was reliving those moments of realization. I didn't just fight to get my company back. I fought to get my peace of mind back. I fought to get my happiness back. And that's what people don't understand about revenge. It's not about winning. It's about letting go. It's about finding peace in the chaos and moving forward, even when the world around you is still in flames. She opened her eyes and looked directly into the camera, her expression calm but resolute. And that's when I realized something else. I realized that the most important thing I could do now wasn't rebuild my business. It wasn't make John pay. The most important thing I could do was rebuild myself. I had lost so much of who I was in the process of this fight, and now I had to rediscover her. Stella's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. I had to remember why I started all of this. I had to remember the woman who built this business with nothing but determination and grit. The woman who didn't need anyone's validation. The woman who knew her worth. I had let the anger, the betrayal, the fight consume me for so long that I forgot what it felt like to just be at peace with myself. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping softly on the wood. Rebuilding isn't easy. It's not about just fixing the surface. It's about digging deep, finding those broken pieces, and putting them back together in a way that makes sense. It's about learning to trust yourself again, to trust that you have the strength to keep going, even when the path ahead is unclear. Stella's eyes brightened as she spoke of this newfound clarity. I started small. I started with the little things, taking time for myself, finding joy in the moments I'd ignored for so long. I reached out to the people who had stuck by me, the ones who had believed in me when I thought I couldn't believe in myself. I rebuilt my relationships, rebuilt my confidence. And as I did, I realized something. It wasn't the business or the revenge that made me whole again. It was the people. It was the love, the support, the strength I found in myself and in others. She paused, the weight of the last few months pressing down on her shoulders, but she held herself upright, firm in her newfound understanding. And I'll tell you something, she continued, her voice steady but laced with conviction. When you've been to hell and back, when you've lost everything and had to fight for every inch, you start to understand what truly matters. It's not about the victory. It's not about revenge. It's about the strength to rise again, to rebuild from the ashes and find your way back to who you were always meant to be. Stella looked at the camera one last time, her smile gentle but full of the quiet confidence that only someone who had fought and won could possess. And that's the story of how I fought back. Not just for my business, not just for my pride, but for myself. Because in the end, the most important thing you can ever fight for is your own peace. With that, she stood up, her back straight, her steps sure and unwavering as she walked out of the frame. The story was over, but the lessons it held would stay with her forever. Stella stood at the door for a moment, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. She had spoken her truth, told the story of betrayal, loss, and ultimately redemption. But even as she walked away from the past, she knew that the journey she had gone through, though it had shaped her, was only one chapter in a life that was still unfolding. "You think it's over, right?" she said, turning back, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "You think once you've fought your battles and taken your revenge, everything will magically fall into place. But the truth is, revenge might give you the satisfaction of seeing someone pay for what they did. But it doesn't change the fact that the world keeps moving, that life keeps pushing forward whether you're ready for it or not." Her gaze flickered around the room, the same place where her journey had taken shape, and then her eyes softened. "The hardest part isn't what happens in the heat of the battle. No, the hardest part is what comes after. What happens when you've won? What happens when you've gotten everything back and you're left standing there staring at the pieces of your life, wondering if it was worth it?" She took a step closer to the camera, her expression serious, yet thoughtful. "Because here's what I've learned. The fight, the revenge, the triumph, it doesn't make you whole. It doesn't fill the emptiness you might feel inside. When you've been through what I've been through, when you've had your world turned upside down, you start to realize that it's not about what you've lost. It's about what you're willing to rebuild." Stella paused, her eyes dark with the weight of the realization. "I spent so much time focusing on what was taken from me that I forgot to ask myself what I truly needed, what I wanted out of life after all the pain and anger. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of victory, in the thought that once you win, everything will go back to normal. But normal? What is normal, really?" Her voice softened, almost a whisper as she reflected. "We spend so much of our lives chasing something. We chase success, we chase revenge, we chase happiness. But in the end, what we're really looking for is peace. Peace with ourselves. Peace with the choices we've made. Peace with the things we can't change." Stella walked over to a window, gazing out into the world beyond. The city, the people, the noise. It all felt so distant now, as though she had somehow stepped outside of it all. You spend so much time fighting for what you think you deserve, and when it's finally yours, you realize that all that fighting, all that anger, has taken something from you. And the question is, can you get that back? Can you reclaim the pieces of yourself that you sacrificed along the way? Her hands rested lightly on the windowsill, her fingers tracing the edge. "I can't answer that for everyone, but I know for me, the answer lies in what I choose to do next. It's not enough to just win. It's not enough to take back what was stolen from you. The real challenge comes in what you choose to do with the life you have left after the fight." Stella's voice was steady now, her thoughts clear and focused. "I used to think that getting everything back would make me happy. I used to think that revenge would give me peace. But now I see that happiness, true happiness, doesn't come from what you get back. It comes from what you give. It comes from how you rebuild, how you make peace with your past, and how you make room for the future." She turned away from the window, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. "I've learned that the world doesn't stop just because you've suffered. It doesn't pause to let you catch your breath after everything you've been through. The world keeps moving, and so must you." Stella's gaze softened as she continued, her voice tinged with something almost like acceptance. "In the end, I didn't just fight for my business, for my success. I fought for something far more important. I fought for my future. I fought for the woman I wanted to become, not the one who was defined by anger, by betrayal, by revenge. I fought for the woman who could stand tall, who could look herself in the mirror and know that no matter what, she had the strength to rise above. Her hands slowly unclasped, and she straightened, the weight of the past no longer bearing down on her. I don't need revenge anymore. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. What I've learned through all of this is that the only person who has to understand your journey is you. And the only one who gets to decide how your story ends is you. A small, contented smile curved her lips as she stood taller now, her presence radiating with a quiet power. I've faced betrayal. I've faced loss. I've fought for everything I've got. But what I've found is that the greatest victory is not in what you take, but in what you let go. It's in what you choose to hold on to and what you choose to release. She paused, her voice soft but full of the wisdom that only comes from living through the storm. And me, I've let go. I've let go of the anger, the resentment, and the need for revenge. I've let go of the past, and I'm walking into my future, no longer defined by what was taken from me, but by what I choose to create. Stella looked toward the door, her expression one of quiet determination. So, this is where my story ends. Not with a bang, not with a grand, victorious finale, but with peace. Peace in knowing that I fought for what was mine, that I rebuilt, and that I'm finally free to live the life I deserve. And with that, she walked out of the room, her steps steady and sure, leaving behind the echoes of the past and stepping into a future all her own. The door clicked softly behind her, but the story, her story, was far from over. Stella walked into the future, each step steady and filled with quiet confidence. She had fought, won, and rebuilt her life from the ground up. The past, with all its heartbreak, betrayal, and anger, was behind her. But the lessons she had learned would stay with her forever. As she walked down the corridor, she turned back one last time, her voice soft but resolute. I could have let that fight define me. I could have stayed angry, bitter, consumed by what happened. But I didn't. You see, what happens to you doesn't define who you are. What you do with what happens to you, that's what shapes you. She paused, reflecting on the journey that had led her here. We all face our battles. We all have moments where we feel betrayed, lost, or overlooked. But what matters most is how you rise after that fall. How you pick yourself up and decide that no matter how hard it gets, you're not giving up on yourself. Her eyes softened as she continued. It's easy to get caught up in the hurt, in the revenge, in making them pay for what they've done. But here's the truth. Revenge doesn't heal the wounds. Forgiveness does. Not for them, but for you. Because you can't move forward until you let go of the weight of the past. Stella turned back toward the camera now, her gaze steady and direct. I've been through it all. The anger, the betrayal, the desire to make everything right. But the real strength came when I stopped fighting the world and started fighting for myself. I didn't just fight for success or for my business. I fought for peace. For my peace. A small smile tugged at her lips, one that reflected the wisdom and growth she had gained over the years. And that's the lesson I want you to take away from all of this. Don't let anyone or anything take away your peace. Because once you find that peace, once you stop looking for revenge or validation from others, you'll realize that nothing in this world can break you. She straightened her back, her posture proud and unbroken. And that's the power you have, the power to choose, the power to decide who you are and who you will be, no matter what happens to you along the way. Stella turned, walking toward the exit with a sense of finality. But as she reached for the door, she stopped. She looked back once more, a knowing look in her eyes. Remember, life doesn't owe you anything, but you owe it to yourself to keep moving forward. Don't let your past keep you from your future. And never, ever stop believing in yourself. With one last glance, she opened the door, stepping out into the world, a world that now seemed full of possibilities, full of hope. As the camera zoomed out, the screen displayed a final message. Thank you for watching. If you found this story inspiring, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next powerful story. Remember, your story is yours to write. Don't let anyone take the pen. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience with a sense of empowerment and the quiet reminder that their own journeys were just beginning. The fight was never over, but it was always worth it. Lesson of the story. In the end, the real victory is not in getting revenge or reclaiming what was lost. It's in letting go of the past, finding your peace, and choosing to build a better future.